The German shepherd did not enter the church for shelter. She entered because somewhere beyond the rain, a child could no longer call for help. Grace Harbor Church had emptied early that Sunday night as a coastal storm pushed inland over Beaufort, North Carolina. Wind pressed against the stained glass windows, and rain struck the roof in hard, silver waves. Staff Sergeant Luke Bennett stayed behind to secure a loose window latch near the front of the sanctuary. He was 37, white, broad-shouldered, with short brown hair beginning to gray at the temples and blue-gray eyes that always seemed to be measuring distance. He wore a dark work jacket over a plain shirt, his old dog tags hidden beneath the collar. The sanctuary smelled of wet pine, candle wax, and coffee left cooling in paper cups. Pastor Samuel Hart had gone to check the basement doors, leaving Luke alone among rows of empty pews and the low hum of emergency lights. Luke was tightening the final screw when the main doors opened with a sudden gust. Cold rain swept across the stone floor. A female German shepherd stepped through the doorway. Her black and tan coat was soaked flat against her body, and a small pale patch showed at the center of her chest. Mud darkened her legs. Her amber eyes moved across the sanctuary with alert, exhausted purpose. She did not shake the water from her fur. She did not search for food or warmth. She walked straight down the center aisle. Each step echoed beneath the high wooden ceiling. Luke lowered the screwdriver. "Easy, girl." The dog kept coming. Around her neck was a worn nylon collar with no visible tag. A torn strip of blue fabric hung from one side. She stopped at Luke's boots and looked up at him, breathing hard. Something small and pale was held carefully between her teeth. Luke crouched, keeping his hands low. "What have you got?" The German shepherd opened her mouth. A tiny blue baby sock fell onto the stone between them. For 1 second, neither moved. The sock was damp, stained with mud, and small enough to fit inside Luke's palm. The dog turned her head toward the open doors. Then she looked back at him. "Did you bring this from someone?" Luke asked. She gave a low whine. He picked up the sock. It was still faintly warm beneath the rainwater. That detail changed everything. The dog moved toward the entrance, stopped halfway, and looked over her shoulder. Luke remained beside the pew. She returned, touched her nose to the sock in his hand, then walked back toward the door. "You want me to follow?" Her ears lifted. From the side hallway, Pastor Samuel appeared carrying a flashlight. He stopped when he saw the dog. "Where did she come from?" "I do not know." Luke held up the sock. But she did not come alone. Thunder rolled over the church, deep enough to make the old windows tremble. The German shepherd crossed to Luke again and caught the sleeve of his jacket gently between her teeth. She pulled once, released him, and faced the storm. 3 signals. The door. The sock. His sleeve. Luke felt an old memory rise in him, one he had spent years trying to quiet. A hurricane relief mission. A porch light seen through rain. A sound he had dismissed as loose metal. By the time his team returned, the family had already been moved by someone else, but the lesson stayed. Small signs were only small until they were the last ones left. Luke slipped the sock into his jacket pocket and reached for the flashlight. "Samuel," called Deputy Morgan. "Tell her we may have a missing child." The pastor nodded and hurried toward the office. Luke looked at the German shepherd. "Show me." She stepped through the doorway into the rain, then stopped beneath the church awning until he joined her. Outside, the parking lot shone black beneath the storm. Wind bent the live oaks along the road. The dog lowered her nose to the ground, found the scent she had carried through the night, and began moving east. Luke followed. He did not know her name. He did not know whose sock rested against his chest. He only knew the dog had crossed the storm to place it at his feet, and this time, he would not ignore the sign. The German shepherd moved with purpose through the church parking lot, her nose low, her pace steady despite the wind pushing rain across the pavement. Luke followed with the flashlight in one hand and his jacket pulled tight against the cold. Behind him, the church doors closed, and the warm light from the sanctuary narrowed into a thin gold line. The dog did not look back until she reached the edge of the lot. There, beneath a live oak bent by the storm, she stopped and waited. Luke crossed the last few yards. "I am here." Her ears lifted. Then she turned east along a narrow service road that ran behind the church cemetery. Gravel shifted beneath Luke's boots. Water streamed through the shallow ditches on both sides, carrying leaves, pine needles, and pieces of bark toward the marsh. The German Shepherd stayed near the shoulder, avoiding the deepest water without losing speed. She knew the route. That much was clear. Luke had followed trained dogs before. They moved differently when they were searching. Less wandering, more decision. This dog checked the ground at each intersection, raised her head to test the wind, then chose a direction without hesitation. She was not lost. She was returning. Luke touched the pocket where the baby sock rested. Even through the fabric, he could feel its small shape against his chest. The memory from years earlier returned with each step. After Hurricane Matthew, his unit had helped reach families cut off by floodwater near Lumberton. On the second night, Luke had seen a weak porch light flickering through heavy rain. He had assumed it belonged to an empty farmhouse because the evacuation map showed the road cleared. His team continued another mile before turning back. When they finally reached the house, a local volunteer crew had already found an elderly couple inside. They were safe, but Luke never forgot how easily a small light had nearly become invisible. No one blamed him. That made it worse. Since then, every unexplained sound, every distant movement, every signal at the edge of attention carried weight. He had left the Marines 2 years later and returned to Beaufort, where Pastor Samuel gave him work repairing windows, roofs, and whatever else the church could not afford to replace. Luke liked broken things that admitted they were broken. Hinges sagged, wood split, glass cracked. People were harder. They smiled through damage and called it healing. The dog turned off the service road and crossed a strip of wet grass toward the old cemetery wall. Luke slowed. "Where are you taking me?" She passed through an opening in the stone fence and moved between rows of dark markers shining with rain. Her paws made almost no sound now. The flashlight caught her black saddle, the pale patch on her chest, and the torn blue strip hanging from her collar. At the far side of the cemetery, she stopped beside Luke's yellow raincoat, which he had left draped over a maintenance cart earlier that afternoon. She pressed her nose to the sleeve, then looked at him. Luke frowned. "You came through here before." The dog sniffed the coat again, then touched the metal chain beneath his shirt with her muzzle. His dog tags shifted under the fabric. A faint clink sounded between them. Her expression changed. Not recognition exactly. Something older. Familiarity. Luke crouched and moved the torn blue fabric aside. The collar was reinforced nylon, worn but sturdy, the kind used for working dogs. No nameplate remained, but faint stitching showed where one had been removed. The German Shepherd stepped back and turned toward the road again. Luke stood. Headlights appeared through the rain behind the cemetery. Deputy Claire Morgan's cruiser rolled to a stop near the service entrance. She stepped out wearing a waterproof jacket, her blonde hair tucked beneath a cap. Pastor Samuel climbed from the passenger side with another flashlight. "Luke," Claire called. "We checked current missing person reports. Nothing yet." The German Shepherd gave one sharp bark. She looked toward the marsh road, then back at Luke. Claire followed the dog's gaze. "She leading you somewhere?" "She has been leading me since she came through the church door." Luke showed her the sock. Claire's face tightened. "That is fresh. And she knows the route." The dog trotted to Claire's cruiser, sniffed the front bumper, then returned to Luke and pulled lightly at his sleeve again. Claire opened the rear door. "We can drive until the road narrows." Luke shook his head. "She may lose the scent if we move too fast." The dog was already heading toward the darkness beyond the cemetery. Pastor Samuel looked at Luke. "You trust her?" Luke watched the German Shepherd pause beneath the rain, waiting for him. "I trust that she came too far to be ignored." He stepped forward. Claire and Samuel followed, and together they disappeared down the marsh road behind the dog, carrying the only clue they had. The marsh road narrowed within half a mile, turning from gravel to packed earth washed slick by the storm. Claire's cruiser could go no farther, so she parked beneath a leaning cedar and radioed their location to dispatch. Pastor Samuel took the second flashlight. Luke kept the baby sock inside his jacket, protected from the rain. The German Shepherd moved ahead, then stopped at every bend until all three followed. Her breathing had grown heavier, but she refused to slow. "She has done this route before," Claire said. Luke nodded. "More than once, maybe." The dog reached a fork where one path curved toward the public boat launch, and the other disappeared behind a line of palmettos. She lifted her head and tested the wind. For several seconds, she stood still. Then she turned toward the boat launch. Claire raised her flashlight. "That matches a report from earlier." Someone saw a German shepherd near the marina before dark. Pastor Samuel looked toward the dark water beyond the trees. Then her family may be down there. The first answer seemed simple. A stranded boat. A vehicle near the docks. Someone waiting beneath the storm. They followed the dog toward the marina, where aluminum masts tapped softly against their lines and waves pushed against the pilings. The parking area was nearly empty. One pickup truck stood beneath a security lamp, and an old fishing skiff rocked against the dock. The German shepherd searched the pavement, moved around the truck, then stopped. She did not bark. She did not approach the dock. Instead, she turned back toward Luke. "This is not it," he said. Claire checked the truck through the window. Empty. No car seat. No bags. No sign of a child. The dog crossed to Luke, pressed her nose against his jacket pocket, and gave a sharp whine. Luke removed the sock. She touched it once, then ran toward the road they had just left. Pastor Samuel exhaled. "She brought us here because her scent crossed this place. Or because someone carried her past it," Claire said. The German shepherd returned to the fork and chose the palmetto path without hesitation. The false trail fell behind them. This route was narrower and darker, bordered by reeds that bent under the wind. Salt water had pooled across the ground in shallow sheets. Luke's boots sank into mud with each step. The dog moved carefully, placing her paws along the raised edge where grass still held. After 200 yards, she stopped beside a broken fence post. Something pale clung to the wire. Luke lifted it free. A torn corner of a baby blanket, light blue with small white stars. The German shepherd touched it with her nose, then looked ahead. Claire's voice changed. "Now we know the child came this way." Luke held the fabric beneath his flashlight. It was wet, but not old. A thin streak of red clay marked one edge. The soil along the marsh road was dark and sandy. Red clay came from farther inland. "They were in a vehicle," he said. "The blanket caught when someone passed through here." Claire scanned the ground. Tire marks crossed the path, partly washed away by rain. One set led toward a county access road beyond the reeds. "Dispatch can check traffic cameras," she said. "But we may not have time." The German shepherd gave another low whine and began moving again. Luke noticed something new in her gait. She favored her right front paw now, but she did not stop. He crouched when she paused at the next rise. "Easy, girl." She allowed him to examine the paw. A small thorn was caught between the pads. Luke removed it gently. The dog licked his wrist once, then stood. That single gesture carried more trust than anything before it. Pastor Samuel watched them. "She chose you quickly." Luke looked at the worn collar and the missing nameplate. "Maybe not me. Maybe something I carry." He touched the dog tags beneath his shirt. The German shepherd's ears lifted at the faint metallic sound. Then she turned toward the path. Ahead, beyond the reeds, a weak beam of light moved once through the rain and vanished. Luke froze. "Did you see that?" Claire raised her flashlight. "Yes." The dog stepped forward, but Luke caught her collar before she could run. "Wait." The light appeared again, lower this time, then disappeared behind a stand of live oaks. Not a porch light. Too unsteady. A flashlight, or a phone with almost no battery left. Claire radioed dispatch and requested medical support to stage at the county road. The German shepherd pulled against Luke's hand, not wildly, but with urgent strength. He released her. She crossed the rise and descended toward a narrow dirt lane hidden beneath fallen branches. At the entrance, a weathered sign leaned sideways in the mud. "Carter Day School, closed." Luke felt the sock against his chest. The dog stopped beneath the sign and looked back at him. This time, she did not need to pull his sleeve. He understood. Someone had not gone toward the marina. Someone had left the road, crossed the marsh, and taken shelter where no one would think to look. Luke raised his flashlight and followed her into the darkness. The dirt lane curved beneath heavy live oaks and ended at a low brick building with boarded windows and a sagging wooden sign above the entrance. Carter Day School had been closed for years, but one side door stood partly open, moving an inch at a time in the wind. The German shepherd reached it first and stopped. Her chest rose and fell quickly. She looked at Luke, then pushed her nose against the gap. A faint sound came from inside. Not a cry, more like something small shifting against fabric. Luke raised one hand. "Claire, with me." "Samuel, stay near the door and keep the light on the entrance." Pastor Samuel nodded. Claire moved to Luke's left, flashlight steady, while the dog slipped through the opening. The hallway beyond smelled of damp wood, dust, and old paint. Children's drawings still clung to the walls, their colors faded beneath years of moisture. Tiny handprints, paper stars, a row of names written in careful block letters. Luke followed the dog past an empty coat rack and a classroom filled with overturned chairs. The German shepherd did not search each room. She knew where she was going. At the end of the hall, she stopped before a door painted pale yellow. One paw scratched once against the bottom panel. Then again. "Someone is in there," Claire whispered. Luke tried the handle. Locked. He knocked gently. "This is Luke Bennett. We are here to help." For several seconds, there was no answer. The dog pressed her body against the door and gave a soft, trembling whine. Then a woman's voice came through, weak but clear. "Hope." The German shepherd's entire posture changed. Her ears lifted. Her tail moved once. Luke looked at Claire. They had her name now. "Ma'am, we have Hope with us," Luke said. "Can you unlock the door?" A pause followed. Metal scraped faintly on the other side. "The chair is stuck." Luke tested the door again. Something heavy blocked it from within. "Step back if you can. I am holding my baby." Her voice shook. "I cannot move much." Luke looked at the hinges. Old, rusted, mounted on the hallway side. He slid the flat end of his screwdriver beneath the lower pin and worked carefully while Claire held the light. The first hinge released with a dull click. Hope waited beside him, watching the gap beneath the door. Luke removed the second pin, then pulled the door outward enough to create a narrow opening. Warm, stale air escaped from the room. Inside, a young woman sat on the floor beneath a faded alphabet mural, wrapped in a gray blanket. She held an infant against her chest. A battery lantern beside them gave off the weak beam Luke had seen through the trees. The baby's face was calm but tired, one tiny foot bare beneath the blanket. Hope entered immediately and crossed to them. The woman reached out with one hand and pressed it into the wet fur at Hope's neck. "You came back," she whispered. The dog lowered herself beside them, placing her body against the child's legs. Luke crouched several feet away. "My name is Luke. This is Deputy Morgan. Are you Emily Carter?" The woman nodded. "Emily Carter. My son is Noah." Claire knelt and began asking simple questions about how long they had been there, whether Noah had eaten, and whether either of them needed immediate medical care. Emily answered slowly. Their car had stalled on the county road when water rose over the shoulder. Her phone had lost power after one emergency call failed to connect. She carried Noah to the old school because her father once worked there and she knew one room stayed dry. Hope followed them inside. Then she left. Luke asked. Emily looked at the dog. "I did not send her." "Not exactly. I opened the door and told her to find help." She gave a tired, unbelieving laugh. "I thought she would stay near the car." Hope rested her head against Emily's knee. Luke removed the baby sock from his pocket and held it out. Emily covered her mouth. That was in Noah's blanket. She took it carefully and placed it over the child's bare foot. The sight of it there, ordinary and small, made the entire journey feel real. Claire radioed their location and confirmed that rescue personnel were approaching from the county access road. Luke glanced at Hope's collar. The torn blue fabric had loosened further, exposing a second layer beneath the nylon. Something white showed inside the seam. He touched it gently. "Emily, may I look at this?" She nodded. "It belonged to my father. I never replaced it." Luke opened the torn edge and pulled out a narrow emergency identification strip protected by clear plastic. The letters were faint, but readable. Emily Carter. Infant son. Medical kit and vehicle. Luke looked toward Claire. "There is more information here." Claire copied the details into her radio. Emily stared at the strip. "I did not know that was inside." Luke turned it over. On the back, written in smaller letters, was another name. Henry Carter, retired United States Marine. Hope watched Luke as his dog tags shifted beneath his wet shirt. The faint metallic sound filled the quiet room. Her ears lifted at once. Luke understood then that she had not simply found the nearest light. Somewhere in the storm, she had recognized something familiar in him before he had recognized anything in her. The identification strip changed the room. Until that moment, Luke had believed Hope had chosen the church because it was the nearest place with light. Now he wondered whether the dog had followed something older than distance. Emily held Noah close while Claire relayed the medical information to the rescue team. The baby stirred beneath the blanket and made a small, tired sound. Hope lifted her head immediately. "He has been warm enough," Emily said. "But his formula is in the car, along with the rest of his supplies." Luke looked toward the dark hallway. "How far is the vehicle?" "Maybe half a mile from here. On the county road." Claire listened to her radio, then shook her head. "The water is still rising near the shoulder. The medical team can reach us from the North Trail, but they need another 10 minutes. Emily's eyes moved to Noah's bare foot, now covered by the blue sock. He missed his last feeding. Luke felt the familiar pull of urgency, but this time it did not come with panic. It came with clarity. "The kid is still in the car?" Emily nodded. A gray bag behind the driver's seat. Hope stood before anyone gave a command. She walked to the doorway, looked back at Luke, then touched her nose to the emergency strip in his hand. Claire frowned. "She knows the car. She knows the route," Luke said. Pastor Samuel appeared in the hall carrying an old wool blanket he had found in another room. "I can stay with Emily and Noah." Claire looked at Luke. "You are not going alone." "I was not planning to." Hope was already moving. Luke followed her into the hallway, and Claire came behind him. Outside, the rain had eased, but the wind still moved hard through the oaks. Hope took the narrow lane back toward the county road, favoring her right front paw slightly where the thorn had been. Luke kept his flashlight low, watching the ground. "Slow down, girl." She glanced back, adjusted her pace, and continued. That small act told him more than any command could have. She was not frantic. She was working. The car appeared beyond a line of reeds, angled partly off the road with its hazard lights blinking weakly. Water moved around the tires but had not reached the doors. Claire checked the surroundings while Luke opened the rear passenger door. Inside, a gray medical bag rested behind the driver's seat beside a folded stroller and a small plastic container of formula. Hope climbed halfway into the car and pressed her nose against the bag. "Found it," Luke said. He lifted the strap over his shoulder. On the seat beside it lay a framed photograph wrapped in a grocery bag to keep it dry. The glass had cracked at one corner, but the image remained clear. A younger Hope stood beside an older white Marine in a field jacket. He had one hand resting on her shoulder and a patient smile on his face. Written beneath the photograph were the words Henry and Hope, training day. Luke stared at it. Claire leaned closer. "That is Emily's father." Luke nodded. Hope looked from the photograph to Luke's hidden dog tags. She recognized the sound, he said, or the smell of the metal. Maybe the jacket too. Claire studied the dog. Emily said Henry never finished training her. Maybe he finished the part that mattered. Luke slipped the photograph into the medical bag and closed the car door. On the way back, Hope moved more slowly, but she did not stop. When they reached the school, the first medical responders were coming through the north entrance carrying lights and dry blankets. Emily's face changed when she saw the gray bag. Relief softened every line. Luke handed it to the medic, who began preparing Noah's formula and checking the supplies. Hope lay beside Emily again, her wet body forming a quiet barrier between the family and the cold floor. "She found the church," Emily said. "But why you?" Luke removed the photograph from the bag and showed her. Emily touched the cracked glass with one finger. "My father wore those tags every day after he retired." Her eyes moved to Luke's collar. "Hope used to sleep beside his boots." Luke looked down at the dog. "She heard mine when she came near me." Emily smiled through exhaustion. Then she did exactly what he taught her. Hope opened her eyes at the sound of Henry's name. Luke knelt beside her and rested one hand near the pale patch on her chest. Outside, the storm was finally moving east. Inside the old school, a child drank from a warm bottle, a mother breathed without fear, and a German shepherd closed her eyes because the people she had gone searching for had finally understood the message. The medical team worked quietly in the old classroom while the storm weakened beyond the boarded windows. One responder checked Noah's temperature and breathing. Another wrapped Emily in a dry blanket and asked simple questions in a calm voice. Luke stood near the doorway with rainwater dripping from his jacket, watching Hope lie beside the baby. The German shepherd's eyes remained half closed, but every time Noah moved, one ear lifted. Claire returned from the hall after speaking with dispatch. "The North Trail is clear enough," she said. "They can carry Emily and Noah out that way. The road crew will handle the car in the morning." Pastor Samuel gathered the remaining blankets and opened a path through the classroom. Emily looked down at Hope. "She will not leave us." Luke crouched beside the dog. "She does not have to." He reached toward the worn collar. careful and slow. Hope allowed his fingers beneath the torn nylon. The emergency strip had been returned to its place, but the seam was too damaged to hold it safely. Luke removed the strip and handed it to Emily. "Keep this with Noah's medical bag." Emily closed her fingers around it. "My father put that there. He always planned for things no one else considered." Luke glanced at the photograph tucked inside the bag. He trained her to do the same. A medic lifted Noah's carrier while Emily stood with assistance. Hope rose immediately, though her right paw still bothered her. Luke noticed the hesitation. "You have done enough for one night." Hope looked at the doorway, then at Emily. She would not be left behind. Luke took off his belt, threaded it carefully through the collar, and made a temporary lead. "All right," he said. "We go together." The group moved through the hallway beneath the faded drawings and paper stars. Claire led with a flashlight. Pastor Samuel stayed near Emily. Luke walked beside Hope, matching his pace to hers. Outside, the rain had become a fine mist. The air smelled of wet earth, salt grass, and pine. Emergency lights glowed beyond the trees, turning the marsh silver and blue. Hope stopped at the edge of the North Trail. Her body lowered slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Luke knelt and slipped one arm beneath her chest and the other beneath her hindquarters. She was lighter than he expected. "Easy, girl." For one moment, she resisted, still watching Emily and Noah. Then Emily spoke from beneath the medic's umbrella. "It is all right, Hope. We are going home." The dog relaxed against Luke. He carried her the final 100 yards to the waiting rescue vehicle. Her wet fur chilled his arms, and her heartbeat moved fast but steady beneath his hand. The medic opened the rear doors. Emily and Noah were secured inside first. Hope was placed on a folded blanket beside them. The German shepherd immediately rested her head near the baby carrier. Noah's small hand slipped free of the blanket and touched the silver buckle of her collar. Hope closed her eyes. Luke stood at the open doors, uncertain whether to step back. Emily looked at him. "Come with us. The medics need room. Then follow us to the clinic." Her voice was tired, but firm. "She trusted you before she trusted the building full of people. I think my father would have wanted me to pay attention to that." Luke looked at Hope. The dog opened one amber eye. Something in him shifted. For years, he had treated the memory of that old hurricane mission like a warning carved into stone. Do not miss the sign. Do not be late. Do not trust yourself. Tonight had carried the same rain, the same darkness, the same small clue at the edge of attention. But this time, he had followed it. Claire touched his shoulder. "I will drive you back for your truck after they leave." Luke nodded. The rear doors closed gently. As the vehicle pulled away, Hope lifted her head behind the glass and watched him until the lights turned onto the county road. Pastor Samuel stood beside Luke beneath the dripping trees. "You heard what she was asking." Luke looked toward the fading lights. "I almost did not. But you did." The pastor's words were quiet. "Sometimes that is the only difference mercy needs." Dawn was still hours away, but the clouds had begun to break over the marsh. Luke reached into his pocket and found a single thread of blue yarn from Noah's sock clinging to the lining. He rolled it between his fingers, then let it rest in his palm. The message had been delivered. The child was safe. Yet as he looked toward the road where Hope had disappeared, Luke understood that the dog had carried more than a sock into the church. She had brought him back the part of himself that still knew how to follow a sign. By the time Luke reached the clinic, the storm had moved farther out over the Atlantic, leaving the streets washed clean beneath the yellow glow of early morning lamps. Claire dropped him near the entrance and promised to return for Pastor Samuel. Luke stood for a moment beneath the awning, his jacket still damp, the faint blue thread from Noah's sock tucked inside his pocket. Through the glass doors, he saw Emily sitting in a wheelchair with Noah asleep against her chest. Hope lay on a blanket beside them while a veterinary technician examined her paw. The German shepherd lifted her head the instant Luke entered. Her ears rose. Her tail moved once against the floor. Emily noticed. "She has been waiting for you." Luke walked closer and crouched beside the blanket. Hope pressed her muzzle into his hand. The technician smiled. "Small cut between the pads. Nothing serious. She is tired, dehydrated, and far too determined for her own good." Luke looked at Hope's amber eyes. "That sounds familiar." Emily laughed softly, the first easy sound he had heard from her. Noah stirred, then settled again. A nurse brought warm formula and a fresh blanket. The room smelled of antiseptic, coffee, and rain drying on coats. It should have felt ordinary after everything that had happened, but Luke could not stop looking at the dog. "How long have you had her?" he asked. 3 months, Emily said. "She belonged to my father. After he died, she stayed with a neighbor until I could bring her home." She reached down and rubbed the pale patch on Hope's chest. He rescued her when she was young. She had been abandoned near a training field. He never called her a service dog, but he taught her small jobs. Bring the phone. Find the door. Stay with the baby. Luke glanced at Noah. And find a Marine? Emily shook her head. Not exactly. My father used to say, if something goes wrong, find someone who knows how to listen. Hope always recognized his uniform, his boots, his tags. She looked toward Luke's collar. Maybe she found the closest thing to him. Luke touched the chain beneath his shirt. For years, the tags had felt like proof of everything he had failed to leave behind. In Hope's eyes, they had become something else. A signal. A promise. Emily reached into the medical bag and removed the photograph of Henry and Hope. There is more on the back. Luke turned it over. Written in faded ink were the words, "Hope does not need perfect commands. She needs a reason to come back." He read the sentence twice. Emily watched him. My father wrote that during her training. Luke handed the photograph back carefully. He understood her. He understood people too. Emily looked toward the window, where the first pale light of dawn had begun to appear. He used to volunteer with veterans who were struggling after they came home. Grace Harbor helped him start the program. Luke felt the room shift around him. At the church, in the old fellowship hall. It ended after he got sick. Hope rose slowly and walked the 2 steps between them. She sat beside Luke, leaning her shoulder against his knee. Emily smiled. Maybe she remembers the place. Luke remembered the way Hope had crossed the sanctuary without hesitation. The way she touched his tags. The way she led him through rain as if following a path laid down years before. Maybe she remembers more than we do. The clinic door opened, and Pastor Samuel entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked from Hope to Emily, then to Luke. "I spoke with the church board," he said. "They heard what happened." Luke accepted the coffee but did not drink. "And?" Samuel's eyes softened. "They want to reopen Henry's program. Training support dogs for veterans and families who need them." Emily looked down at Hope. "My father would have liked that." Samuel nodded toward Luke. "They asked whether you would help." Luke almost refused out of habit. He repaired walls because walls did not ask questions. Dogs and people did. Hope placed one paw across the toe of his boot. The gesture was simple, familiar in a way Luke could not explain. He looked at the blue thread still caught inside his pocket, then at Noah sleeping safely in Emily's arms. "All right," he said. "I will help." Outside, dawn spread across the wet streets. Inside, Hope lowered her head onto Luke's boot and closed her eyes, as if the journey she began in the storm had finally reached its second destination. 3 weeks later, the fellowship hall at Grace Harbor smelled of fresh paint, clean wood, and coffee warming in a silver urn near the wall. Luke stood beneath a row of newly repaired lights, tightening the final screw on a low training platform while morning sun crossed the floor in pale gold. He had spent most of the week rebuilding shelves, replacing a warped door, and clearing storage boxes that had not been touched since Henry Carter's program closed. The work felt different now. He was not repairing an empty room. He was preparing a place for people to return. Hope lay near the entrance on a folded blanket, her paw fully healed, her black and tan coat brushed clean. Noah sat in a carrier beside Emily, wearing 2 matching blue socks. Every few minutes, Hope lifted her head to check on him, then settled again. Pastor Samuel arranged chairs in a wide circle, while Deputy Claire carried in a box of donated leashes and water bowls. "You know," Claire said, setting the box down, "most people would call this a quiet Saturday." Luke glanced around the room. "It is quiet." At that moment, Hope rose, walked to the box, and removed one leash with her mouth. Claire laughed. "She disagrees." Emily watched the dog bring the leash to Luke. "My father used that color during training." The leash was dark blue, faded near the handle. Luke took it and ran his thumb across the worn fabric. "Did he leave any notes about the program?" Emily nodded toward a cardboard file box on the table. Samuel found them in the church office. Inside were training logs, attendance sheets, and handwritten observations from veterans Henry had worked with. Luke opened the first folder. The notes were not about commands. They were about patience. One man spoke only when walking beside a dog. Another slept better when a German shepherd rested outside his bedroom door. A third learned to enter crowded stores again by following the steady rhythm of paws beside him. Henry had written one sentence across the top of every file. Give them something living to trust. Luke read it twice. Hope stood beside him, watching. He knew what he was doing, Luke said. Emily smiled. He knew people needed time. The first participants arrived before noon. A retired Navy mechanic with a quiet Labrador. A young mother training a rescue dog to alert when her son wandered too far. Two former Marines who spoke little but relaxed when Hope greeted them without rushing. Luke did not stand in front of the room and give a speech. He walked among them, adjusted leashes, demonstrated calm hand signals, and listened. When one veteran hesitated near the doorway, Hope crossed the room and sat beside him. She did not touch him. She simply waited until he stepped inside. Luke saw Henry's lesson in that moment. Help did not always pull. Sometimes it made space. Later, during a break, Emily handed Luke a small envelope. This was in my father's files. His name was not written on it. The front carried only 4 words, for the next listener. Inside was a single page. If you are reading this, the program found someone willing to continue. Do not try to rescue everyone. Teach them to notice one another. Trust the dogs when they stop. Trust the people when they need time. And remember that mercy rarely arrives loudly. Luke lowered the page. Across the room, Hope was lying beside Noah while the baby reached toward the pale patch on her chest. Emily stood nearby, no longer wrapped in a rescue blanket, no longer speaking through fear. Samuel was showing Claire where the new storage cabinets would go. The fellowship hall was alive again, not with miracles, but with small acts placed carefully beside one another. Luke folded Henry's letter and returned it to the envelope. Hope rose and crossed to him. She touched her nose to his dog tags, then looked toward the open doors of the hall. Outside, the sky was clear, and the live oaks moved gently in the coastal wind. Luke clipped the blue leash to her collar. Ready? Hope stepped forward. This time, she was not leading him toward danger. She was leading him into the work that remained. By late afternoon, the fellowship hall had grown quiet again. The last participant left with a donated leash folded beneath one arm, and the final coffee cup sat cooling beside Henry Carter's old training files. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, turning the dust in the air to gold. Luke stacked the chairs while Pastor Samuel locked the supply cabinet. Claire carried the empty boxes to her cruiser. Emily stood near the doorway with Noah asleep against her shoulder, one blue sock visible beneath the blanket. Hope rested at Luke's feet, tired but content, the faded blue leash loose across the floor. You did well today, Emily said. Luke looked around the room. They did the work. So did you. He almost dismissed the words, but Henry's letter remained inside his jacket pocket. Trust the people when they need time. Luke had spent years believing time only widened the distance between what happened and what should have happened. That afternoon, it seemed to do something else. It made room. Pastor Samuel walked over carrying a small wooden box. This was found behind the old filing cabinet, he said. It has your father's name on it. Emily opened the lid. Inside lay a worn Marine Corps dog tag chain, a photograph of Henry kneeling beside a younger Hope, and a tiny pair of blue baby socks still wrapped in tissue paper. Emily stared at them. He bought these before Noah was born. On the back of the photograph, Henry had written one line. Hope knows the way to Grace Harbor. Luke looked toward the German shepherd. She had not wandered into the church by accident. Henry had once trained her there, walked her through the sanctuary, and taught her that the building meant safety. The storm had not given Hope a miracle. It had given her a memory. Emily pressed the photograph to her chest. She brought us to the last place he trusted. Luke knelt beside Hope. The dog lifted her head and touched her nose to his hand. And she found someone wearing the same kind of tags. Pastor Samuel smiled softly. Perhaps that was enough. They walked together into the sanctuary as evening settled over Beaufort. The main door stood open to the mild coastal air. No storm pressed against the windows now. Only the sound of gulls, distant traffic, and leaves moving in the live oaks. Emily carried Noah down the center aisle. Hope followed beside her, then stopped at the exact place where she had dropped the sock 3 weeks earlier. Luke stood near the pew he had been repairing that night. For a moment, the room held both versions of itself. The dark sanctuary full of rain and urgency. the quiet sanctuary full of light and breath. Emily reached into Noah's bag and removed the small sock Hope had carried. It had been washed clean, the pale blue fabric soft again. She held it out to Luke. "I thought you might want to keep it." Luke looked at the sock, then at Noah sleeping safely against her shoulder. He shook his head. "It belongs with him." Emily smiled and slipped it gently over Noah's foot. Hope watched, her ears relaxed. The object that had once carried fear now looked ordinary again. That felt right. Luke opened the church door wider. Warm evening light spread across the stone floor. Emily stepped through first with Noah. Hope followed, but paused at the threshold and looked back at Luke. He touched the dog tags beneath his shirt, then nodded. "Go on." Hope crossed into the sunlight and joined her family. Luke remained in the doorway, listening to the small sounds outside. Noah waking, Emily laughing softly, Hope's collar moving as she walked. Behind him, the church no longer felt like a place where someone had arrived asking for help. It felt like a place where people had learned to notice one another before the signs became too small. Luke closed one hand around Henry's letter in his pocket. He did not call what happened a miracle. He had learned that grace rarely announced itself that clearly. Sometimes it came through a remembered road, a worn collar, a child's missing sock, and a German shepherd who refused to stop until someone listened. Hope turned once beneath the live oak, amber eyes meeting his. Then she walked beside Emily toward the parking lot, no longer searching, no longer carrying a message, simply going home.